Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining our 680th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, the Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the immense pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Dani and Sheilah ReStack and Amanda Gluibizzi. We are also thrilled to welcome poet Sua Yoo here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges that Black Lives Matter, and here in New York, we are on Lenapehoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and the Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize that land acknowledgements are not a replacement for actual and necessary decolonial work, but a reminder of place and of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the land we are speaking from. And now to introduce today's guests and hosts. As written in CinemaScope, Dani and Sheilah ReStack have embarked on an artistic relationship that is formally and emotionally adjacent to their domestic lives, a quotidian zone that they share with their young daughter, Rose. Both artists have established careers on their own as well. ReStack collaborations have shown at the 2017 Whitney Biennial, Iceberg Projects Chicago, Toronto International Film Festival, and others. They've received grants from the Canada Council for the Arts and Ohio Arts Council. They have been residents at the Headlands Center for the Arts, MacDowell, and Visual Studies workshop. And formerly associate professor at Ohio University, Amanda Gluibizzi is the founding co-director of the New Foundation for Art History and art scene editor for the Brooklyn Rail. She specializes in mid and late century, 20th century art, design, and urbanism in the United States, Europe, and Latin America. Amanda is the author of Art and Design in the 1960s New York. And I'm so very excited to have you all with us here today. And I'm happy to pass it over to you, Amanda, to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. And thank you, Dani and Sheilah, for being here. And thank you, everyone, for participating today on this really, really beautiful New York fall day. It's so lovely here. This is such an exciting day for me. First of all, because I haven't done an NSE in months, so I've missed all of you. So thank you for having me back. And also, I get to talk to artists whose work I love, but also whom I love. And I'm so happy about this. It's not always that we get to speak to our friends when we're doing this. We make friends here, but we don't always bring old friends. So I'm really, really thrilled to have Dani and Sheilah with us today. What we're going to do is we'll start with a single still image just to let you see what the Camden Arts Center show looks like. And then we'll show a quick video clip, and then we'll come back and kind of scroll through some images so that we can see Dani and Sheilah's exhibition. So what we're looking at here, obviously, is a corner with these gold-leafed Polaroids hanging around the corner of the wall. And to the left, you can see this gray curtain, and it's behind the curtain that this video is playing. And so Eleanor is going to pull up the video and show us a little clip that the artists have excerpted from the video that's playing right now.
What jetsam falls and curls too? What floor, what splayed in what lake? What jetsam falls and curls? What floor, what splayed in what? What jetsam falls? What floor, what? What jetsamed? What floor? One of us swimming, one of us float. One of us. One. Rita, Yao, Shaghab, Opien, Lucy, Ode, Hedwig, Leona, Tamra, France, Ahon, Sorana, Ruzena, Suyen, Kyung, Teresa, Teofana, Cesar, Olga, Becca, Virgilia, Portia, Chuhu, Aban, Clementine, Ixchauche, Jacinta, Maggie, Uria, Agrippina, Dirce, Nell.
Great, so that's just a little flavor of the video that's playing for us. And then Eleanor is going to start scrolling through the images too, so that we can kind of walk through the exhibition with Dani and Sheilah as they're speaking to us. So Dani, Sheilah, I wanted to ask first for you to tell us about your installation at the Camden Arts Center, which is in London. So if people are in the UK or nearby, they can go and see it right now. I'm curious about how the exhibition developed and also how you went about starting to think about it. What was your organizing principle for this installation?
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us. And I guess cuts in the day, that's some language that Sheilah developed, and it's in relationship to Forrest Bess. He's showing in the Camden Arts Center on the other side of the building, and he was devoted to his place of residence, which was on the Gulf of Mexico. In a he was fishing shrimp, and he had a bait shop, and so we sought out a water location, an underwater shot we made to communicate with him. And he was a seeker of transcendence, and we feel we were and we are always seeking transformation rather than transcendence. And the cut, he had these triangle symbols, and some were about deep cutting and some were about shallow cutting. And so we were acknowledging his symbols, and also the idea of cutting video, editing, and other reasons. You want to talk about the cut of the day?
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's such an honor to be here. And certainly like the cuts in the day, the other, besides those, the relationship to Forrest Bess and the relationship to, film, video making, also like I think I was thinking about like just a cut in a day, like what can be released, or what can happen if you put pressure up against a day, like, and again, that could be like a a positive or a negative thing, but just this idea of like the day being capable of having like transformational possibility, kind of like what Dani was saying earlier. And so I do think that that this, I guess there's always this desire for connection, like whether it's between ourselves or our family, or in this case, like with Forrest Bess, who's kind of like a queer hero and enigma of sorts, so that did kind of, to your question, Amanda, that did provide like a kind of organizational principle in a way, or like a line to hold on to, was like, how do we make connection with Forrest Bess, or what his life was, and like what Dani's saying in terms of his sort of relative, like his isolated choices, that he made in terms of where he lived, and how he interacted with the art world, etc. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that like water was like the thing that we wanted to connect with him through. That just, I mean, even in the other video works that we've done together, like water becomes this refuses form, it's like a kind of malleable metaphor. It's in us, it's essential for life. So water felt like a way to do that, which is sort of ironic, we realized, because we went on a quest for water in Ohio, which proved like extremely difficult because it's like we're basically, there's just not that many. We're in Columbus. We tried.
There's rivers polluted, but a lot of mucky water. So when we were using that GoPro underwater, it was just so murky. And then we went to Lake Michigan, which was clearer, but it also had a lot of waves that time that we went out. And so the props underwater that you saw wouldn't stay still. And so the shot of good water we got was in Nova Scotia, where Sheilah's from.
Yeah, which is like kind of like weirdly interesting in a way, because like afterwards I thought about it and I was like, that's weird. Like the title kind of comes from like looking at his symbology of like these triangles. And then if you like draw a line from like, you know, like Texas to Ohio and then to Nova Scotia, which is like my own kind of remote place of origin, you know, where I was born and grew up and etc. Was
Which
formed.
was a homophobic location, just like where I was raised in a small town in upstate New York. So Forrest Best is definitely an inspiration and a hero.
And I guess like that kind of speaks to like the video piece that you guys just saw like a little bit of. Sorry for the quality, it was on the iPhone. So but anyway, I feel like the whole show, there's a lot of other work that's present, which includes like the, you know, solo work that both Dani and I have done and more collaborative work. So and also the videos that are in another room. But these works, I don't know if they feel like the work that's happening all the time. You know what I mean? Like this is like the work that kind of like provides like the kind of current of like, you know, Dani's working in the studio. I'm, you know, wrestling around with photography in like various ways. You know, like these are like the kind of like constant conversations that are similarly in relation to, you know, our each other and our to each other and also to you know, our family and our location, etc. So yeah, so I guess like there's kind of like two things sort of like occurring simultaneous in terms of like how the show was formed.
Looking at these particular works, we've already seen one that I believe includes your daughter, and then we have another one here that has a photograph. I was really curious, first of all, about how they're installed. And so I'm curious to ask you about that, you know, like tell us about these constructions. But then also the one that we saw previously that I think included Rose, if I'm correct, it was facing to the window, actually. So it's a piece that would have been difficult to stand directly in front of and see all of it at the same time. And so I'm really curious about the building of these pieces, but then also some of your installation choices here, how you're asking people to kind of go around the corner or go around the back in order fully to experience the works that you've chosen to display.
Yeah, absolutely. So the works themselves are they're shot on film and then printed out onto these like kind of felted blankets. So, and they're double-sided. So there's this kind of like, you know, like textural fabric-y kind of quality to the photographic print. And then I sew over those and kind of use that as a ground to make collages onto. And
there's a lot of writing.
Yeah,
she writes on them and sews photographs on top of the paper photograph on top of the soft photograph.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and sometimes like some walking prints, which I like have used as photo paper attached to my feet to generate like a sort of an image over time or a document of a day, and then those are squished in between the plexiglass and secured with these like copper pins.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like very curious, you know, or continue to be curious about like how to kind of activate some kind of conversation between registers. So it's like, here I have like this like soft kind of domestic sort of messy material that's, you know, been collaged onto and, you know, all these different materials. And then you have this like rigidity of the plexiglass and the way it acts as a reflective material. And then that's like balanced on these concrete wedges. And those wedges I kind of like see as like prying apart like space or time or in my own experience, like prying apart like the sort of like, you know, singularity of the photograph, you know, like the image, like what's behind it, you know, and so they are like double-sided, and you can move around them, and they're balanced by like pulling up on that thread. So that little string that you see there, that's actually sinew, is like, that's what holds the that's what holds the image up, you know. And that kind of like precarity was like, continues to be like kind of like perplexing and interesting to me. And it feels like just like the precarity of relationship, or like, I think I've before said like just like the precarity of how you construct a day, like how do you like manage to get all the things done and the children picked up and the meal, like it's like all of that is like this kind of like really like this balancing act, or this kind of delicate sculpture, you know, or homage. So that's how they're put together. And then the one that is facing the window, I mean, obviously like Dani's pieces have like a real kind of like visceral quality, and so there was a desire not to kind of like squish things together. But then like Rose is like also looking out the window of the kitchen, you know, and so then she's like simultaneously like, we're like doubling that by her looking out the window of, you know, the Camden Art Center, which is such a gorgeous kind of architecture to it. It's like kind of like an alcove. So you kind of like come into this space and you encounter Rose looking out the window, and then you have to like move your body. It's like you have to choose whether or not you want to look at the front or you want to look at the back, you know, and the back is like this red acetate material that has a cut through it. So there is a cut that joins both sides. But yeah, that choice was like, just thinking about like how to, like, I like the idea of like Rose looking out at this world, you know, and she's 12 years old. She's kind of at this like verging point, you know, like between like who she is as a private self and who she is as a public self. And so just like thinking about that too, in terms of our work and her own journey in terms of like private public.
That's really wonderful. There was a really beautiful show in London over the summer called The Woman at the Window at the Dulwich Picture Gallery. And when I was seeing these images, I was thinking about all of these resonances with like a beautiful Vermeer, you know, this woman standing at the window looking through the window. And so here is Rose, but it's so different when we have a woman artist depicting this woman at the window, or this young woman at the window. It takes on a different sort of valency, a different sort of agency, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. And also too, like, because like certain aspects, like this is what's so nice about working onto the photograph is that you get to like highlight certain things. And that's kind of what happens inside the installation as well. As like, what do you decide to pull forth? How do you make your own hierarchy of sense? You know, and so like putting pressure on like a chair or a bowl, you know what I mean? As opposed to like, you know, the subject, like it just feels like this, you know, like a kind of destabilization of like, what am I supposed to be looking at here?
Mm-hmm. And how about the plexiglass? Does it cast red onto the walls?
With the sunshine. And that's one of the fabulous things about this room. I mean, Forrest Best's work was in the dark. It was the gallery was painted black based on a letter he wrote with the desire to see his work as if it were night. So you go in his area and it's these paintings are glowing, and then you come in where we were and it was just flooded with sunshine or gray light.
Wonderful, wonderful. I love the idea of the plexi like casting the shadow, and so you as the artist then are really imbuing the space, right? It's not just that you are installing things or hanging things or placing things, but actually you're like saturating the space with your work. I really, really love that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How does the video work with the still imagery?
Well, the videos we've made in the other room, the trilogy of videos, we pull stills from those, print them, and they become part of this book. And they become a starting point for drawing and writing some of the backstory of how these shots were taken and why they were taken. But the video in Camden Art Center holds on its own. I think like it's inevitable that it stems from us as individuals, which the work on the walls is for the most part.
Mhm.
Do you mean some of the stills that are like in the actual room as well, Amanda?
Yeah, I'm just curious about how these two bodies of work talk to each other. You know, so that they're not just installed in the same place, but rather how are they having a conversation with each other?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I guess like partly it's like in seeing them together, it's like you finally get to like
Yes.
contemplate what are they doing together, you know? Which is what's so amazing about having the opportunity. And like I feel like, I mean, like I was saying earlier, like I feel like they almost like pull like from like our kind of each our individual like consistent desires to make work that like speaks to our situation as queer lovers, you know, makers, parents, livers in this world, you know, and then like also like this kind of like fantastical you know thing that we've created, you know, through the video and in that installation, where I feel like it kind of like sort of throws you back and forth from like here's what it is and here's like what it's made out of, you know, like there's this. So I guess like I almost see like this work as like being like like the blood that like courses through like through the video, because there's blood that comes down in the video, you know. And I feel like this work in some ways is like this is the blood, like the thing that keeps us going, you know. And I feel like formally there's so many interesting resonances like with like Dani's paintings and how they're constructed, and there's kind of this tension between like what is like super carefully constructed and what feels like more, you know, spontaneous. And I feel like that kind of, you know, energy is like part of what informs like the video as well, this kind of like movement between like carefulness and, you know, spontaneity as well, so, or gestural. Yeah.
That response just brings up like all of the questions that I have basically. So I'm just going to go for it. So first and foremost, how do you work collaboratively? You've mentioned several times that you have your own practices, but of course we all know because we're here that you have this collaborative practice. So how does that work for you? How do you decide like, oh no, I want to make this on my own, or how do I decide I want to make this with my partner?
Well, for me, drawing solo is just been consistent for 20 years or something. Like I need to go in there and work, but we have Sheilah's studios right next to mine. We have a wall and a door between us, and we always are giving one another feedback that's very helpful. But the video, the single channel video and these kinds of installations are from start to end collaborative in terms of the ideas, the construction. You know, we both hold the camera, we both do the editing, we both go up the ladder and staple gun something into the wall. It's not like one of us is a fabricator and one is the idea source person. I mean, Sheilah does most of the language for us.
And Dani does like the drawing marks, because I'm like, your drawings are fantastic. Well, so let's just go with that.
Yeah, so there's some things, but it's like decisions are made with fighting and compromising and negotiating. I mean, we will trade. Like if I want a certain image and Sheilah doesn't want it, I'll trade her for something.
Like, yeah, when we're making a video together, like sometimes like one of us like really wants, I mean, for instance, like in Strangely Ordinary, This Devotion, that head cutting scene, I was like, come on now, this is just too much, you know? So like, we had to like pare it down through like, I was like, I'll give you this if you'll just like take a minute or two off of that. So yeah, but I think that question about like, I just remember Michael Morris, they live here in Columbus. They're
a witch.
Yeah. And I remember at one point they were speaking to a class that we were teaching, and they made the point that, like, people always talk about like whether they're like single or they are in a relationship. And he's like, none of us are ever single. He was just like, that's just like, just doesn't exist, like we're always. And so I think it's really interesting because, like, that whole, and me too, like I do it too. It's like, well, what did you do? And what did you do? I want to like parse out like the individuality, that's going to be present here. And so I'm not like, but I'm just saying like that, like on the one hand, like we're always like, we live our lives together, so we're always influencing one another. And I know that like my own practice has been like deeply influenced by like being with Dani, you know what I mean? And for the first time in my life, like having an actual studio, like I can make things, like that are like these physical kinds of like sculptural iterations, like, so, but yeah, anyway, so there's a whole like kind of like conversation around what does it mean to collaborate? How does that get validated in a capitalist society that values like the cult of the individual genius, but anyway, that aside, like I feel like sometimes like our solo practices are just like our time to kind of be with ourselves,
and pay homage. I mean, I have teachers that are passed away, like Hilmaf Clint, and I will have a relationship with her in the studio.
Yeah. So, and then the collaborative work feels like a way to like we kind of like, we can make a commitment to that. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, we'll commit that this particular medium is something that we're going to like work with together. You know what I mean? So that just feels like a commitment in some ways. I don't know how long it'll last. I'm not saying it's like lifetime.
Yeah.
But
no, it's important that it evolves, right? Otherwise it can't last, right? It needs to change and develop. There's one of your videos, and I was thinking about it because Dani had sent some clips, is, this shot of a cat with its ear chewed off, and you guys are arguing about brutality. And Sheila's saying, no, it's just, it's too brutal. It's too brutal. Why can't we show a flower? And Dani says, like, how is a flower brutal? And Sheila says, oh, well, it can be brutally beautiful. A flower can be brutal. And I love this way of thinking about your work as kind of this give and take, yes, but also like a real push and pull, kind of pushing each other into new areas where you might not feel comfortable, but where you have to learn how to express yourself in these new parameters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true. Because I feel like the first three, I don't know, or at least the videos in that trilogy are like kind of about our conflict of like being parents together, like, so there's like that kind of like conflict. And then there's also like what I feel like you're pointing to is like, just like, I feel like collaborating with Dani, like I'm such an introvert. So it's like, it has made me have to like be articulate about things that like I would, like that I just wouldn't, and also have like a kind of courage, because it's like, oh, well, I'm doing this with Dani, you know what I mean? So it's like, I'm not alone, like it's like there's like a kind of like courage granted by the collaboration maybe as well. So yeah, I definitely that push pull, like there's the video that we just like made has like an actual scene where we're just going like push push pull, pull.
We're fighting.
We're fighting.
Like physically fighting or
yeah.
Dani and Sheilah also have a famous scene where they're fighting with each other physically, and the soundtrack is basically like a Kill Bill or like a kung fu soundtrack. And so you're hearing all these punches being landed as they're grappling with each other.
You want to show it, Amanda?
Sure. Eleanor, do you think we can show Strangely Ordinary, This Devotion?
It's like 2 minutes.
It's very brief. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the whole piece.
Do you like my color of blue?
It's a dark blue. Like a darker
Navy?
than I thought. No, not navy, but not like light blue.
Not baby blue.
Like pool blue.
Oh.
In the continuing water crisis analysis and our investigation of methods for survival across the globe, there have been reports that some children are being born without the need for water. These water children supposedly emerged through lesbian activities in Ohio.
Then it goes on to a Prince song.
So why do you giggle when you're watching it?
Oh, we had so much fun, and Sheila's brother learned and like taught himself the drone that morning and then shot it. We had a good time with that. And that's like an example of some of these shots that are constructed, we practiced, and then some that just happen because the moment calls for the camera to come out.
Yeah. It's funny too, because it's just like, well, also I just wanted to like shout out, because I think that Dan Jan is here somewhere, and she is like, one of our strategies is to use Inayun to have our friends help us out. So like, that's like the very first shot of like pouring that blood is they're helping us out there. So yeah, thanks to everybody who helps to make these things happen. But also I think it's funny just because like, it's like, we're not like, it's like we're enacting like some kind of trope of like violence that just is like, is normally seen like on the like real big screen, you know what I mean? Like, and we're like able to like infiltrate that somehow and like act it out. And it's just funny, like, to me.
It's funny. It's fun. It's pathetic.
Pathetic.
When you were practicing those scenes, did your neighbors come out and watch?
No, our alley is very, it doesn't draw many people to it. We've done a lot of shots in the alley. Yeah. We have one planned for our next piece.
Yeah, the alley is like an amazing like place to let things happen. It's like it's like the quintessential liminal space.
One of the things that you described when you were doing Strangely Ordinary is you described yourselves as exploring feral lesbianism, but more recently you've started describing an exploration of feral domesticity. And so I'm curious about the shift in language there. Are those two things different? Are they on a continuum? How do you see them relating to each other?
Okay, well, feral domestic, we're always trying to understand what that means. And like, it's an aspiration. And part of it is figuring out what a queer family, a lesbian family is and looks like and can be. But we changed our names to be in relation to an Anne Carson poem. And it's about restacking, thinking about what's important. And I've recently thought about it as, domestic violence is so prevalent in our culture. And part of what I know in my own experience is that anger is a lot easier than sadness. And so a feral approach that would be to actually walk through sadness rather than operate with anger. It's like we can never be wild. Those days are over, but we don't have to be like a domesticated cow. We can try to another approach of resistance to capitalism. We can't get out of paying taxes and things, but that's sort of the aspiration.
Yeah, I guess I sort of feel like I actually didn't hear the feral lesbian before, but I'm like, interesting. Like I was like, maybe Dani was like talking about that.
She must have been. She must have been.
So and I feel like it's feral domestic to me feels like maybe like just like a generative possibility, and maybe it's because like once you put like feral and domestic up against each other, I don't really know what it means either, but I feel like the word feral and then the word domestic have just like an energetic like collision, and like that kind of movement makes room for like this sense of possibility, which I don't really feel like it's like wild against tamed necessarily. I'm just like, let's like open it up for like a multiplicity, you know what I mean? Like how many things are possible in the domestic space that's kind of been like cordoned off or like made to, follow like a certain kind of like normalcy, and just like what's possible if that like opens up like as a radical space of like imagining, like whether or not you choose to use it to regroup, and like be away from that gaze of the outside world, or if like you're using it to like construct like fantasies out of what you have available. It's like it's just that it's just not static, and that just feels like a sense of possibility that I feel like domestic's been really closed down and gendered, and like things happen when you leave the house, like that's where the exciting things are. And so like just like kind of trying to activate that as a space like seems pretty interesting.
And sometimes go ahead.
Go ahead, Dani.
Oh, I was just going to say sometimes we make interventions. At one point we had a cable strung across the kitchen with a bag of water and a feather in it hanging down. So simply navigating, cooking and eating and being in the kitchen with this bag of water that could leak or bust open is a way of prompting, keeping it on the forefront of the mind.
Yeah, or like I just had a flashback to a conversation we had at one point with Tyler Can, and he was saying, well, what would you, it was like during the pandemic, he was like, what would you suggest that people do? And Dani was like, take a chair and put it on the table. Like just like make things
and sit
like,
on it.
You didn't say that. That's dangerous.
No, but that's the point. It's what would you do? What could you do? It's not just to mop the floor, people.
No, but it's like, how do you make things unrecognizable? You know what I mean? Like, I just like feel like that's like such an important capacity to make things unrecognizable.
Well, an aspiration to keep things vibrant.
Yeah.
And do you find that, I mean, obviously you had the bag with the feather and the water hanging in your kitchen, so you had to navigate that, but do you find that just in the everyday that you're experiencing this feral domesticity, like in your domestic life, when you're interacting with your family?
Well, I feel totally inspired by the girls. We have a 2-year-old now. We're a foster family, and her curiosities and way of being absolutely inspires me to rethink what I'm doing. And the fact that these kids can flip from the present to their own imaginary space, all of a sudden we're pretending, and that is inspiring for video making.
Yeah, I mean, that I feel like feral domestic is like, when we were first talking about it, it was like in honor in some ways of like what children are capable of, in terms of just being able to like exit one reality for another, like at the drop of a hat, you know what I mean? Like, or a dime or whatever that phrase is. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I feel like, there's something about the fact that there's like this commitment to, you know, being alive or awake to the possibility of the daily life to yield something that that does, I don't necessarily think like, oh, I've like had a feral domestic moment, but like, you know, because I still don't even know exactly what that means. It just feels like a conversation starter, you know. But it does feel like there's like a being alive to possibility, you know, like a kind of like like we all like we have iPhones. It's like, oh my God, something amazing is happening, you know, whether that's you know, beautiful or funny or whatever,
Well,
you know.
Deborah Stratman said once in terms of art education that the only thing we need to foster is paying attention, because it's all happening all the time. And so this just take note.
Mhm.
And that's what close-ups are about in terms of shooting.
Oh, okay, tell me more.
Well, it's just, you know, if you really look, if you bring something forward right to the camera, then and I mean, I really like to block peripheral vision so that I can really see.
Mm-hmm.
That can happen as we just move through the daily life. I mean, changing the habits of what you look at, for instance, or like paying attention to what you're hearing for a moment, then you can pay attention and be more aware of everything that it is, what it is, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that reminds us all the time of collaboration, because, you know, we're sitting in this room, somebody built the walls here, some trees grew out and their wood was taken, and, you know, that it's like, it's just paying attention, and collaboration is everywhere.
As I was going through the work here and then also the videos that you've made before, this is not an observation that I am alone in making. Blood is everywhere. And I was really thinking about it as the way that blood changes its meaning when you're a woman in your 40s. It just totally changes its complexion, right? It has a different meaning for us as we age. And so I was really curious about that, about you know, your experience. This sounds so stupid. I guess it's very Halloween. Your experience with blood. Tell us about your experience with blood, because to me it feels so personal, and I think that it is so personal. But it also feels like it could be very overtly political. And so I was really, really curious. How are you feeling about your experience with blood?
Yeah, great question. And I feel like my experience with blood is like, I kind of like like on the one hand, like I love it as like this formal thing. Like, it's just like so beautiful to like watch blood. Like the color of it is just incredible. And
Viscous, I mean, the viscous changes towards menopause.
yeah, I mean, that's also part of it. So there's like the formal kind of qualities of blood, but then also like the way that blood like lives in our society, you know. And I feel like I was thinking about it. It's like there's like blood as a woman, or at least my own experience of it is like, you don't talk about that, you know, like
Yeah.
you don't talk about blood now, you know, like when you like start getting your period, you know, it's like, hell, like the one thing you don't want is to be the one who like bleeds through their pants. You know what I mean? Like that's like, hell no. So like, it's like, so blood becomes like really like shameful, you know, like when it's like, it's just like this thing that happens every month, you know, like, and then again, like, so there's just like, it's like there's zero kind of conversation about that. And then that just like continues through life, through childbirth, if you so experience that. And then through menopause, which is like also the other thing that I'm like, why is there nothing written about this, or like, why is nobody talking about this, and like your relationship to like, what does it even, I mean, for me anyway, it's like, what does it mean to be a woman if I don't bleed? You know what I mean? I know I wasn't allowed to talk about it for like 40 odd years or whatever, but like, how am I still a woman if I'm not bleeding, And so, yeah, so I do feel like, and then even like who's allowed to use blood as a material in terms of like whose gender gets to like utilize blood as a prop, as a, as a narrative device, like how do we move things forward with it? And that's why I guess like that scene that we talked about in Strangely Ordinary, this devotion, like I love it and I laugh at it because it feels like it's so unusual to see like two women like kind of using this particular trope for their own ends, and so it just like makes me laugh. And so anyway, so I guess like that's like blood has these like kind of like multiple valencies, but I just like continue to be like fascinated by it, like the way that blood, like on that formal level, when the blood drops into the water, it's so beautiful, like, and but then
well, and I am always looking for common ground with all animals and people, and so for me in dissection of animals, and if they're fresh, there's a blood that pours out, and I really like, I just feel like differences where all the violence comes from, fear of difference. And so the interior body and the interior fluids are the common ground. And actually Forrest Best said when he cut his urethra that he had an ecstatic experience of blood and water,
which he likened to like a kind of religious, I mean, he was pulling from a lot of different religious traditions, but he likened it to like a religious experience, this kind of transcendent moment. And so, I mean, that's why the title of the piece is Blood and Water for FCB. But at the same time, it's like, but here we are as like collaborators kind of creating this like weird three-legged figure and like offering up blood and water through this, through our bodies back to, Forrest Best.
And that was molasses and red food coloring. And we were hoping the fish would come for
Danny was hoping
I was hoping the fish would come up to the lens. And they didn't. There were a couple of crayfish that wandered past, but a friend of ours made some green screen fish to help out for that moment.
Sheila's like, get away from the fish. I mean,
like, yeah, totally.
I think blood too, it's so interesting the way that it changes over the course of a woman's life, right? Like first it's embarrassing and then it's such a relief, right? Oh, blood, oh, thank God. And then blood is loss. And then you lose blood. And it is this thing that winds up being so essential to us, and yet it's true, we don't talk about it, and we can't really discuss it, I think, in a certain way, because of course it's also so personal, and we're taught too that it's so private.
Yeah, it's hard to, well, because I think it like ends up touching on topics that we also don't discuss. You know what I mean? So it's like
mortality,
well,
accidents and violence and people getting
women's
genocide.
Bodies and women, like how we age, and and that's kind of shameful, aging. I know we talked about that last time as a woman. I mean, I'm not saying it's specific to women, but then like I was, even when you were talking, Amanda, I was like, yeah, like the blood that happens, like, because like Dani and I, Come Coyote is about like, me trying to get pregnant, and the blood that comes when you're trying to get pregnant is fucking like the saddest blood there is. Like, and so like, but again, like there's really not a place to talk about that, like, because there's just no sort of like cultural context in which it's okay.
Yeah, that was the image that came to my mind, seeing the blood or molasses coming into the water is that blood that comes with a miscarriage and the realization that, like, yes, I am fully not pregnant, which is something that you're right, we don't talk about except to blame people, right? And to me, that's what made it seem so essentially political too, that in this moment where we might penalize women for having a miscarriage, for example, it seems really important then that we recognize too what that might look like, you know, and the trauma too that could come from something like that.
Yeah. And like the capacity for like autonomy over how, you know, I mean, what you're saying, like if you tie it to the political, but just like how empowering it is to have autonomy over how, you know, these body functions get used, or in this case, like the representation of blood, like as tragic as it might seem, it's also a static because we're the ones pouring that blood. You know what I mean? Like it's like, so there's like this kind of like autonomy that grants the blood like a different quality as well.
I think I'll ask you one more question and then we'll turn it over to our participants. And I'm curious about, you know, you use your body so often in your work. It's your work is like literally and lyrically visceral in this really, really wonderful way. And so I was thinking, you know, you show lovemaking and you show parenting and you show grooming and you show your teeth, and everything about you is available to us if you so choose. And so I'm curious about that too, about the use of your body and the representation of your body as you move into your middle age, and how you start to think about you know, just how will you use your bodies, and how will they be represented, because here too we have a moment in women's lives that aren't right. We don't see naked middle-aged women, you know, unless we look in mirrors, right? So how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, well, one of the things is our availability. We're always around so we can work. And, you know, getting friends to participate is, you have to make an appointment and you got to organize and everything, and friends will do it, and which is fabulous. And but it's asking a lot sometimes. We in the Future from Inside, I mean, the one thing I do want to say is, like, there's a couple things, like I don't want to be a navel gazing artist. It's just that sometimes the personal, like when an artist uses the personal, it helps me reach that work. And so I don't think our experience is unique. And so it's just like, and it's always about trying to imagine another way of being, and courage for women. Those are some of the reasons to do these things. And of course we edit, and I feel I'm not as undone about wrinkling up. I have a problem with pain, but I'm absolutely ready to. I mean, Hannah Wilke is an inspiration. You know what happens here.
Yeah. And
it's just what it is. And we're working on a new piece, and I had to coax a 75-year-old woman who's very heavy to participate. One, she's someone I admire, and then she didn't want to be on the screen. And I said, it's about time we were on the screen.
Yeah, I think back too to, like, we were just doing a Q&A, or I guess I was there because we were swapping off, but somebody brought up this, like, in this kind of compilation of shorts, somebody brought up, oh, these works are like so vulnerable, and there's something, it's like, and Madsen Minek said, like, you know, don't forget that everything is edited. You know what I mean? Like, it's like everything is edited. So there is like kind of like, again, like there's like agency in terms of like what is revealed, you know, and sometimes I feel like the word vulnerability is, you know, like it's like it, I guess like you could like it is a vulnerability, but it's also a reality, you know what I mean? And I think that that's like partly, I don't know, it's just like considering whether the word vulnerability like gets genderfied or something. But anyway, I do feel like there's like it is an interesting question. Again, I don't really know the answer. It's like the same kind of question around like, what about Rose's body? Like, how does that get represented, you know, now that she is you know, 12? What about
She's gonna refuse to be part of things when before it was a requirement because you're part of this family.
Right.
Now we're in a different situation because Sky, it's illegal to show her face. So that's why those Polaroid images, there were 170 pictures of her that Sheila took, have been gold leafed over because she can't be shown. And one of the videos we just made, you can hear her voice. Her voice is the most prominent sound in the video, but you don't never see her. So that's a creative project like that we're trying to deal with. And I also was thinking about home movies versus art. And you know, that really, like, we shoot all the time. In a way, it's home movie, but then when the formal is considered and you use non-diegetic sound is when it turns. But I do think there's a fine line there.
It's the cut.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's the
it's a
cut.
cut.
Well done.
All right.
Sheila and Danny, thank you. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to talk to you. And I'm so excited to hear the questions. And I can't wait to learn more about your wonderful practice. Thank you.
Amanda.
Thank you, Amanda, for your great questions.
Thank you for this really, really rich conversation. I'm excited to just keep marinating on everything. So thank you all. We do have a few questions from the audience. Our first question will be from Judy. Judy, should be good to unmute.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eleanor. Thank you all for this conversation. And thank you also for extending this long conversation with Forrest Bess, because that has to continue as much as anything else. My question was, and I was very piqued about this, in the sense of feral domesticity in your art and your language, because they're, is it a way of carefully excavating and then learning from the negative debris of our Anthropocene?
Wow, you deal with that.
Maybe, you know, like I feel like if that's what's available, you know, to us, then like, because I kind of go back to that. I think it was like Moira Davey was like quoting, oh dear, someone who was saying that like you make do with what's available. So if what we have available is the debris from our Anthropocene, then it's like, okay, let's use that, you know, like, so if that's what we make this feral domestic out of, you know, I think that that's absolutely like part of the conversation, you know, like even when we made that video, you know, Blood and Water for FCB, like we went to the thrift store, we got a bunch of like, you know, items that we then spray painted, you know, so that is basically the negative debris, domestic debris that is like, you know, available on the shelves of your local thrift store that's like being repurposed for some kind of like, Danny always thinks that, or always says that like she's birthing the pots and pans, you know, so like maybe like a rebirthification of like the debris. I feel like it's like a birth of the warrior, you know, warrior women potential. But anyway, but yeah, I think it does want to like, you know, I think that the feral domestic has to hold on to what's available. You know, it can't rule anything out, and everybody's feral domestic could be as different as their experience.
No, I love it. It's both ideologically and physicality, like you know, the thrift store stuff, but then also the ideology behind all that. So it's really unpacking, excavating all kinds of things, and I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you, GE. Our next question will be from Chloe.
Hi, Dani. Hi, Sheila. Thank you so much for that amazing conversation with Amanda. That was incredible. I have a couple of questions. One has to do with fantasy. I'm wondering what role fantasy plays in your work and how you think about fantasy as a way to challenge social norms, or if you think fantasy sort of plays a key role there. And then I'm also curious if you ever think about your work in relationship to the history of the family album and photography, and sort of how the family album has developed as a way to tell stories historically about norms and debunking myths.
Thank you. I would say that the fantasy, well, the most recent in Future from Inside, we're trying to help the young people survive culture disaster, climate disaster. So the efforts are to make kin with animals. So that's what that animation is in between the shots where the women are receiving glacier water in their eyes. So that I would say maybe debunks the social norms, and that, like, who are we choosing to be our teachers? You know, and then what starts in that narrative is that there is water is the most essential like scarcity, and so we are going to be these witches in Ohio who can infuse these children with the capacity not to need water to survive. But then when they get to that stage, but they're going to need community. And so can they be in relationship with predator animals who could protect them?
Yeah, I think that whole kind of idea of fantasy as like a privileging of imagination, you know, like I remember going to a rally not that long ago that was like about having like police presence in the schools, and one of the students got up and was like, when there's police presence, it like kills imagination. You know what I mean? And I was just like, you're so right. Like, and so like in a way, like fantasy is like a word that like that maybe just applies to like using your imagination as a way out of a current reality, you know, like why the hell not? You know what I mean? Like, and not as a way to like be like escapist necessarily, but like also like just like coming up with ideas is like one way forward, you know, like I feel like it's easy to get mired in like kind of a, you know, we're fucked, you know what I mean? Like, so I feel like this is like fantasy is a way forward, or a way to make narrative like that is, you know, does go against like kind of like absolutely goes against like norms. I mean, even the fact that the narratives that are being constructed are like highly experimental, you know what I mean? Like they don't follow any kind of traditional narrative. That also like, it's like, we're like asking you to like feel a story, you know, as opposed
Join
to
us
being
on
told
a
a story.
yeah, like the emotional logic comes first.
Yeah, and I love the question too about the family album, because I feel like there's like all of these, the family album comes from the realm of the personal. It feels like, I mean, that's actually a way to activate, like if we're gonna like make proposals for feral domestic, like why not, you know, like use the family album as like another kind of site for radical, you know, intervention. I mean, Bell Hooks writes about it in you know, in our in His Glory, and she talks about like the importance of like photography in remaking Black history and like possibility, and like how that happened inside the domestic space as like as a way to like counter, you know, the narratives that were put forward by, you know, mass media, etc. So yeah, I feel like the family album is, I mean, when I just like when I was growing up, it was my dad took the pictures, you know, like it has like certain kinds of like parameters, and that was what drew me to photography, was I wanted to like make new facts.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated those answers. Thank you.
Thanks for that question, Chloe.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Yeah, our next question will be from Carolyn. And if anyone else wants to jump in with a question, just send a little message in the chat, or you can raise your hand. Carolyn.
Thanks, Eleanor. Thank you both so much for this conversation. We're sort of formulating a question with our staff here about audience and who you're really speaking to, and if that's how much of a consideration that is when you're making the work, the reception of it, if it is a consideration at all. And I guess the second part of that is bringing the work to London and thinking about just cultural shifts that might take place having the work there. Yeah.
Well, I would say, well, the audience that I think about are young women for courage. And I do think that vulnerability is courage. And the thing about making single channel videos for a cinema environment is that I do care about that the video isn't boring. So much experimental video, you tend to be too long, you get sleepy. So there's part of me that's tied to maybe it would be entertainment factor with that. I mean, I don't know the best, it's not like best, but it's wonderful to show work to lesbians because they just like, you don't have to explain anything, but it doesn't need to be the only audience.
Not at all. Like, I mean, it is true. Like when in Come Coyote, there's a scene of like a DIY insemination, and it's like, like you can tell who your audience is, like based on who like understands what's happening. You know what I mean? And it's like, I don't know where that imagery exists,
Well, where it exists, that's not a comedy.
Yeah.
It's
right.
often
or like
cheesy,
made by a, probably a male director or something like that, like depicting it. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like we're so fortunate to have we're very fortunate. We live in like we both teach, like we have like communities of people who are interested in the work and like allow us a certain kind of freedom, because the work is, experimental, and so I feel like it's like this is our community, like right here, like we're making this work, but then like you hope that it also like reaches others. But I don't want to be like, oblivious to the fact that like there is like, there is an art world that like is trained in seeing, and we're part of it, and so but then I feel like there's also work that we've done, like we have worked with Shameless Light, which is like a kind of collecting of queer love letters, and that's like a desire to like connect with community in a different way. And those have existed as like live performances, but also as projections. And so it feels like there's like multiple ways to interact with community, and I think it would be like disingenuous to imply that like one way is like reaching everything. I feel like there's different ways in which you reach people, and so and I'm interested in all of them, and then in terms of London, what do you think?
Well, before Forest Best became our focus, we were thinking about the history of the witchcraft in the UK. So there was that curiosity. And then, but the people over there, I can say the people, we didn't go exploring very much. We were working, and the people at the Camden Arts Center were just extremely open to all kinds of ideas and contributing ideas. And they didn't seem stiff or anything like you'd think.
I mean, there's like I have a beautiful memory of there, in that video, I don't know if anybody noticed, but there's like a rock that Dani's foot is placed on top of. And there's moments in which like the video kind of matches up or maps onto, the object. And I went out with one of the preparators or installers and like got a rock from the garden, and they made a hole, and we like put the rock into this like structure. It was just like amazing to like have that kind of
engagement, like this willingness and the labor done with patience, tremendous patience.
Yeah, so it was
and skill.
Yeah, so I mean, it was interesting because like Forest Best is American, and we are too, so it's like I feel like we were in conversation with him, so it felt like we were like had made a connection. So it didn't feel like we were like
all alone in London, like, and in a place that we don't know that well. But yeah, it felt like we already had built a community with Forest Best. So whether he knows it or not.
He knows.
He knows. Okay.
So interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. And our final question will be from our artistic director, Phong Bui.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you, Dani and Sheila and Amanda. I was in and out. Forgive me, meeting in between whatnot, but it sounds like an amazing conversation. And listen to you make comment about forest bass and about blood, about wounds and cuts and whatnot. And I just realized that what compelled me recently to go back and rereading the Four Noble Truths and a lot of Buddhist scripture and writing about Buddhism, which is all about the middle way. And the middle way is the only potential option to mediate the extreme contrast, the polarity, what separate the binary language and rhetoric that's been so damaging as we just barely escaped from the presidential election in Brazil, the silver won by one hairline over Bolsonaro, just like Biden did over Trump. And what's so interesting about Bass, as you mentioned, that he self-operated himself. There was a film made by a friend of ours, Chuck Smith, about him, and the comment that that somehow the Buddhist scholar Robert Thurman made when he did that, not just the result, what ended up in his painting, which we know that he's essentially one-shot painting. He wouldn't paint unless there's a dream that occurred to the night before. But the idea of bringing the synthesis of male and female, which is what hermaphrodity is about as an idea, is to obtain the strength and the wisdom from the both sexes. And according to Thurman, he believes that it's a deep religious reincarnation of a yogi from a former life, which is so interesting to me. Because, it's not just only the commentary of his own mortality and the practice as an artist, but I believe that we Americans, should I call myself American now? Been here long enough. So we Americans are so frightened of death. And I think the amplification of that is clear after September 11. And it's very strange to me that the whole fear of dying, fear of confronting death is something that we see consistently through not just Bass, but there's been other artists that I've been thinking of lately. For example, our friend Ron Warchow, that is similar mark making in his shadow-shaped canvas, something that came from his mentor, John Graham, whose real name is Ivan Dobosky. He used to be the captain in the Tsar Army Cavalry. And he had his own contacts and believed in Jungian animus, of the two sexes too. So the wound and the cut is really a way to relate to religious ecstasy also. So it's complex. What's the question for? I forgot now. The question is very simple. Do you guys read Jung or any other form of philosophy that sort of somehow accentuate this collective or coming together as collaboration, the so-called art of healing that you described so eloquently earlier in your collaboration?
Well, I would say I don't read philosophy or psychoanalysis, but I do care a lot about dreams and the way that women in the past who separated from the church and found their own way of communicating with a higher power for guidance. Those are two things that interest me, and I really appreciate you bringing up the middle way as an approach, because I do often, for clarity, think about things in a binary manner. And the beginning of our collaboration was based on this problem where I was taking the words strangely ordinary, this devotion, to mean the singular idea that Sheilah was devoted to being a mother over everything else, and that it was a strangely ordinary approach. And I find motherhood extraordinary to be consistent and committed. And but it's much less of a binary when you really start to unpack things and understand.
Because I think that's the whole reason we started working together, is because I got so angry that Dani was like thinking that like that was my sole devotion was to Rose at that time, and so that was just irritated me that she would think that I couldn't have multiple devotions,
Well, I didn't say that you couldn't. I just the way I understand it was that you weren't, that you were honoring that one and then also calling it ordinary. I was taken by the phrase, and I was then wanting to ask it to myself, what am I devoted to? So that this is why we work together, is because it's stimulating.
And I think that there's we each have different kind of, I think philosophical inclinations, we're very different. And I think that sometimes we fight about it. Sometimes it's inspiring for one another, but I did want to just shout out that Strangely Ordinary, this devotion comes from Winnicott via Maggie Nelson in the Argonauts. So that's where that,
absolutely,
that points to that. And I think it's interesting that you brought up the middle way as well. I mean, the one thing that we do together is we read Pema every morning.
Pema Chodron.
Yes, that's our thing. So and not because I think it does speak to something energetically that's very different from what our own experience of being in this world is, and as a way of reflecting. And in terms of a middle way, I feel like that figure that we make in the video is this three-legged thing. It's collaboration is what's created. I'm not saying a middle way is created, but a third thing is created. So in terms of what exists between these kind of polarities, it's collaboration somewhere in that mix as well. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the a much more productive way to mediate life anyway, because there's, if there is no light, there's no darkness, there's no good, there's no evil, there's no above, there's no below, there's no left, there's no right, so on and so forth. And I just feel that we need to come together and amplify and intensify and encourage, engender all of that collaborative effort. There's no collaboration without friction. Occasional friction is so important to regenerate the kind of energy that one needs to grow, to accepting criticism from others is equally important as it is for others to speak up, and I think I'm just happy that in the segment, not just the lovemaking part, the bleeding part and whatnot, but also the fighting part, as Samantha pointed out, so all of that is part of the spirit of actual collaboration. So it's reflect what we do with the rail anyway. So thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you.
Beautiful conversation. Grazie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phong. And I think we wanted to pass the mic really quickly over to Dan, who wanted to ask one question. You should be able to,
Hi.
I did.
I enjoyed this so much. Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. And I have this question about, well, ever since I know you two, I witnessed like incredible and consistent momentum, stamina, strength, and resistance, all wrapped so gracefully. Both of you have that capacity. And my question is like, as strangely ordinary, this strength and the resistance, I just renamed your work. The resistance is the keyword. And I know it's not easy for speaking for an artist as myself, navigating the daily business mentality and sometimes gender brutality and the power injustice in that embedded in everyday life, in work, in mundane. Can you two speak a little bit of the strategy, or is there a magic portal that you can share, that how you enter and pick up strings and come back and both devote and fight at the same time?
I wish, Dan. I mean, like, it's like, I think it's that like the illusion of like you look out and you're like, oh gosh, like Dan has it together, man. Like it's just like, but it's all an illusion. You know, like I mean, life is hard, you know, like, and it is struggle and it's pain, and the demands are so many, especially when you want to try to be a parent and be an artist, and then you have to make money. It's like, and be in a relationship. It's like, it's just like, I just think that it would be foolish to say it's anything but extremely challenging, you know, and
Yeah,
so
but I would say the resource, at least for me, is a simple word to use is God, and God meaning energy, forces beyond human, and so that's a place for gathering strength that isn't coming from myself.
yeah, I feel like maybe, I'm not sure if I feel like I sort of have like a allergic reaction whenever I hear the word God. We always like talk about this, but I do feel like I sometimes there's something that in collaboration like makes you, like, even if I don't want to do something, if Dani wants to do it, it makes you accountable to doing it. So there's something I've noticed that before, that it's like, whereas like I might just like go to bed and like eat some popcorn, like I've committed to like doing something with Dani, so I like
Yeah,
follow
one of us
through with
has
it.
an idea.
Yeah,
It's sort of the agreement is that we try it, and you have to get up and try it.
yeah.
So that's a good thing about collaborating, is it keeps you willing.
And I think maybe like productivity is overrated, Dan. I think that like we should like be celebrating those who can like take it down a notch, like a little bit more. It's you know, like I don't know. I don't really know how to not be a workaholic. So I don't think that's a good thing. But that's
From
like
my
a
perspective, it's like you two are Yoda. That seems like the force is on your side.
oh gosh.
The force, everybody has access. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
It's everybody has access to it. It's just pay attention and you can listen.
The force. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Stan. Thank you so much again, Dani and Sheilah and Amanda. It's been such a lovely afternoon. We do have a tradition here at the Rail of concluding our community events with a poetry reading. And I'm really excited today to welcome our Poet Laureate of the Day, Sua Yoo, to the stage. Sua is based in Los Angeles. They most recently co-established Purpose Repair Shop, a nonprofit art production and dream facilitation archive. Thank you so much for being here, Sua.
Thanks for opening the space for me to respond with a poem. I love the story of you both location scouting for your video for water in Ohio. I'm also from the so-called Midwest, and I have a feeling that in your art practice, you're inspired by your experience with water in the Midwest, with the rivers and streams, where you see so much like debris and flotsam, and it's all sort of transformed by the water and the rain and the sun. And, you know, you see all these domestic objects that are transformed and become sort of feral. Like you think you see a rat, but it's actually like a shoe in the river. So I love thinking about that. I think maybe to complement that, I'm going to read an excerpt from a longer poem called A Death on the PCH. Yes, we were living on a houseboat, or we were a houseboat. Thick blocks of crusty upholstery on top of built-in wood benches to cushion our musings, our foreplay, our meals. The benches were hinged and opened like a treasure chest to reveal paper bags of swollen magazines and books and elephantitis, wool blankets stained with rust, a cracked glass orb lantern tattooed with dust, a significant number of dead snails. When snails die, they leave just the shell behind, so it looks like their soul left the body. From this, we can infer that snails are souls, my snailish soul. There had been bright, plasticky life jackets in there once, stiff and proud as sadomasochist collars, but one day the houseboat capsized, metaphorically speaking, and very slowly. In the beginning, the water seeped in timidly behind the textured wallpaper, leaving wet scratches, as if a prisoner lived in the walls and was marking the days passing with scratches of their fingernail dipped in urine. And before we knew it, a water spot suddenly bloomed, to much awe, like the shadow of an angel unfurling its wings. The floorboards swelled up with mildew and began to split, and we could no longer walk barefoot. We danced around in 3-inch heels before a 4-inch rusty nail pierced our sole, and upon recovery, we installed monkey bars on the ceiling so that we can swing across and never touch the floor. We kissed like bandits in those last days. Love is no match for knickknacks. Under a final tsunami of painted ceramic squirrels, we held tight to each other, stealing the other's breath, putting our mouths together and gulping the air from the other's lungs back and forth to buy time. We paddled restlessly, kicking aside amber bakelite napkin rings and clingy wet satin girdles. A toothpick holder shaped like a woodpecker got in between us, and with the next breath, I swallowed it whole, choking on its wooden beak. I flailed, breaking the grip between us, and we began to drown, separately, apart, alone, our lungs filling with oily screws, coconut shell beads, and dirty balls of aluminum foil. I kicked my legs and screamed underwater, my vision overtaken by bubbles, giant bubbles, bubbles that whole universes lived and died in. The back of my throat burned with salt, my lungs burned, and my eyes burned. Water filled my ears until I was completely deaf. I cried out of frustration, and the sea snatched up my tears to be strewn and swallowed up by some ugly little fish, which would later be swallowed up by an ugly big fish, which would be speared by someone hungry, who will burn its flesh and pick the white meat from its bones and exclaim how salty, how tasty the meat of this stupid, big, ugly fish is. Then the strangest thing, instead of losing strength, my kicking legs began to propel my body forward faster and faster. And once I realized I could control my speed and general direction, I kicked to aim the top of my head towards what I felt was the surface. And I kicked harder, now crossing my ankles to kick both legs as one, feeling the power of the undulation pass through my entire body until I felt like one long, sleek ribbon of flesh flying through the water. I could see the water ahead of me begin to lighten from black to deep jade as the sun began to pierce through the filter of krill, bubbles, rotting flecks of kelp, fish scales, and plastic refuse. Faster and faster, I felt so powerful, and I realized I could still hold my breath. My lungs were that powerful. I could hold my breath forever. That's how it felt. And suddenly I saw the white hole of the sun undulating just beyond the last few feet of water, the white hole burning brighter, steadying itself like a dancer correcting a rickety pirouette, when when I burst through the water, leaping through the sky, a human no longer, but now a dolphin. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sua. That was a truly perfect way to close our conversation today. Thank you again to Dani and Sheilah and Amanda. We would also like to thank Margot from Camden Arts Center for helping to coordinate today's event. We would also like to thank the Terra Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and for their support of our growing archive, which you can check out on our YouTube channel. And for the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics in our monthly publication and in our public events, like here in our daily NSE. So please check the chat for a link to donate to support our operations. And please join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern for a conversation with Liz Collins, Julia Bryan Wilson, and Ksenia M. Soboleva, the event of Mischief at Touchstones Rockdale. And we will be concluding with a poetry reading by Rebecca Tyke. And you should now be able to unmute your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you to all of you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you
so
so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dani. Thank you, Sheilah. Thank you,
Dani.
Eleanor. Thank you, Sua.
Amanda.